Alexander Frost stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over the skyline. Another day, another billion-dollar deal closed. He should have felt something, pride, satisfaction, even just mild pleasure. Instead, there was only the same hollow emptiness that had become his constant companion. "Sir?" His assistant Lynn stood at the door, tablet in hand. "The board sends their congratulations on the merger. The stock is already up 12% in after-hours trading." Alexander nodded without turning around. "Anything else?" "Your car is waiting downstairs. And Dr. Rivera called to confirm your appointment tomorrow at 2. At the mention of his therapist, Alexander's jaw tightened. 6 months of weekly sessions, and what did he have to show for it? A diagnosis of clinical depression and a medicine cabinet full of pills that made him feel nothing at all, instead of the vague misery that at least reminded him he was alive. "Tell her I'll be there," he said, finally turning from the window to gather his things. The ride to his mansion outside the city took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of silence as his driver, Wei, knew better than to attempt conversation. Alexander scrolled through emails and news alerts, the words blurring together until he closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the cool leather seat. He remembered a time when he used to listen to music during these rides. Before everything started feeling so pointless. Before success became meaningless. The car rolled to a stop in front of the sprawling mansion, 17,000 square feet of architectural brilliance that had been featured in design magazines worldwide. He'd bought it 3 years ago after his company went public. He couldn't remember why it had seemed important at the time. "Good night, sir," Wei said as Alexander stepped out. The massive front door opened before he reached it. His house manager, Mrs. Chen, greeted him with her usual efficient nod. "Good evening, Mr. Frost. Dinner is prepared whenever you're ready." "I'm not hungry," he replied, handing her his coat. Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held concern. "You haven't eaten since breakfast, sir. Chef prepared your favorite sea bass." Alexander sighed. "Fine, I'll eat in my study." His footsteps echoed through the marble entry hall as he climbed the grand staircase. So much space for one person, so many rooms he never entered. Sometimes he wondered why he didn't just sell the place. But then he'd have to decide where else to go, and that seemed like too much effort. In his study, Alexander sat at his desk and mechanically ate the perfectly prepared meal while reviewing quarterly projections. The fish tasted like nothing. The wine, a rare vintage that cost more than what most people made in a month, might as well have been water. Later, he wandered through the quiet house, restless despite his exhaustion. He passed the music room, door slightly ajar, moonlight spilling across the sleek black grand piano that had been there when he bought the house. He hadn't played since college, another thing he'd once enjoyed that had fallen away as his company consumed his life. Alexander pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the shaft of moonlight. He ran his fingers along the piano's smooth surface, leaving trails in the thin layer of dust. No one ever came in here. What was the point of having a music room when there was no music? He sat on the bench and lifted the fallboard, revealing the pristine keys beneath. His fingers hovered over them for a moment before he pressed one key. The single note hanging in the air like a question. The memory hit him, unexpectedly, sitting on his grandfather's lap as a child while the old man played lively tunes that made little Alexander laugh until his sides hurt. The joy of those moments, so pure and simple. When was the last time he had laughed like that? Had he ever laughed like that as an adult? Alexander closed the piano and left the room, the memory following him like a ghost. The next day, he sat across from Dr. Rivera in her warmly lit office, staring at the abstract painting on the wall behind her head rather than meeting her eyes. "You seem particularly distant today, Alexander," she observed, her voice gentle but firm. "Did something happen?" He considered lying, as he often did, telling her things were fine or slightly better, whatever would make the session end faster. But instead, he found himself telling her about the piano, about his grandfather, about the memory of laughter. "I can't remember the last time I actually laughed," he admitted. Not a polite chuckle at some business dinner, but real laughter. The kind that feels like, I don't know, like being alive. Dr. Rivera nodded, jotting something in her notebook. "That's an important realization. Reconnecting with activities or memories that once brought you joy can be a powerful step in recovery. Your grandfather's piano playing made you happy. Have you considered playing yourself? Alexander shook his head. I barely remember how, and I don't think it was the piano itself. It was how he played it, like he was telling stories with the music. Sometimes funny stories that made me laugh. Then perhaps you need to find someone who plays that way, Dr. Rivera suggested. Music therapy can be very effective for depression. It might help you reconnect with those positive emotions. Alexander considered this on the ride back to his office. The idea of hiring someone to play the piano for him seemed ridiculous, the kind of extravagant whim only the very wealthy could indulge. But wasn't that the point of all his money? To get what he wanted? And what he wanted suddenly and desperately was to feel something again, to laugh. As soon as he reached his office, he called Lynn in. I need you to find me a pianist, he said without preamble. Lynn blinked, the only indication of her surprise. For an event, sir? No, for me. Someone to play at the house daily. I see. Lynn's fingers hovered over her tablet. Any particular style of music? Alexander leaned back in his chair, trying to articulate what he wanted. Someone who doesn't just play notes. Someone who puts feeling into it. Someone who can... He hesitated, feeling foolish. Someone who can make me laugh. If Lynn found the request strange, she didn't show it. I'll start looking right away. How soon would you like this person to start? Immediately. Tomorrow, if possible. That night, Alexander found himself back in the music room. He opened windows to air out the musty smell and called Mrs. Chen to have the piano tuned first thing in the morning. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of anticipation. Not quite hope, but something close to it. The next day, a stern-faced man in a bow tie arrived promptly at 7 in the evening. Lynn had hired Wolfgang Schmidt, a renowned concert pianist with impressive credentials. Alexander sat in an armchair as the man played technically flawless renditions of classical pieces, his face never changing expression, his posture rigid as a board. After 30 minutes, Alexander stopped him mid-sonata. Thank you for your time, Mr. Schmidt. That will be all. The pianist looked offended. I was scheduled for a full hour. And you'll be paid for the full hour, Alexander said, rising from his chair. But this isn't what I'm looking for. Over the next 2 weeks, a parade of pianists came and went. Some were technically brilliant but played without emotion. Others tried too hard to be entertaining, their performances feeling forced and insincere. None of them made Alexander feel anything close to laughter or joy. This isn't working, he told Lynn after dismissing the 9th pianist. Cancel the rest of the interviews. That evening, he sat alone in the music room, staring at the piano with growing frustration. Maybe Dr. Rivera was wrong. Maybe nothing would bring back that feeling. Maybe he was just broken beyond repair. He didn't notice the cleaning woman enter until she spoke. Excuse me, Mr. Frost. I didn't know you were in here. I can come back later. Alexander turned to see Elena Reyes standing in the doorway, cleaning cart beside her. She had worked for him for how long? He wasn't sure. She was part of the household staff that kept the mansion running, practically invisible to him until now. It's fine, he said, waving her in. I'm just leaving. Elena nodded and wheeled her cart into the room. As Alexander reached the door, he heard her humming softly, a melody he didn't recognize but that somehow caught his attention. He paused, looking back. She was dusting the piano, still humming, her movements graceful and reverent as she cleaned the instrument. Something about the way she touched it made him curious. Do you play? He asked abruptly. Elena startled, clearly surprised he was still there, let alone speaking to her. Yes. A long time ago. Show me, he said, the words coming out like a command. Elena hesitated, looking from him to the piano and back. Sir, I'm here to clean. I don't think, please, Alexander said, the word unfamiliar on his tongue. When was the last time he'd said please to anyone who worked for him? Slowly, Elena set down her dusting cloth and moved to the piano bench. She sat, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. Then she began to play. The music that filled the room wasn't technically perfect like Wolfgang Schmidt's, but it was alive in a way none of the professional pianists had managed. Elena played with her whole body, swaying slightly, her face changing with the music, smiling during light, playful sections, eyes closing during emotional passages. Alexander stood frozen by the door, unable to leave. unable to speak. The piece ended and Elena's hand stilled on the keys. "That was Chopin," she said softly, not looking at him. "My father taught me when I was little." Before Alexander could respond, she rose quickly from the bench. "I should get back to work." "Wait," he said, his mind racing. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something stir inside him. A spark of interest, a flicker of possibility. "I want to hear more." Elena looked at him uncertainly. "More Chopin?" "More you," Alexander said. "More of how you play." He took a breath, about to say something he never thought he'd say to a member of his cleaning staff. "I want to hire you to play for me." Elena's eyes widened. "Mr. Frost, I'm not a professional. I haven't played regularly in years." "You play better than any of the professionals I've auditioned," he said bluntly. "Name your price." As Elena stood there, clearly struggling with his unexpected offer, Alexander felt himself holding his breath. He didn't understand why it suddenly seemed so important that she say yes. Only that for the first time in ages he cared about what happened next. Elena stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her uniform. Mr. Frost was offering her a job as his pianist? It had to be a joke. Or worse, some kind of trick that would cost her the steady cleaning job she desperately needed. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have professional musicians coming here." "I'm just what?" Alexander interrupted, his eyes more alive than anyone at the mansion had seen in months. "Just someone who plays with actual feeling. Just the first person who's made me want to listen for more than 5 minutes." Elena glanced at the door, wishing Mrs. Chen would walk in and rescue her from this strange conversation. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I have my duties here. I'm responsible for the East Wing cleaning. And if I don't finish, I own the house. Elena, I decide what the priorities are." Alexander moved closer to the piano, running his hand along its glossy surface. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years, sir." He looked genuinely surprised. 2 years? And we've never really spoken?" Elena bit back what she wanted to say. That wealthy people like him rarely noticed people like her. That she had cleaned his study while he worked dozens of times without him looking up once. That she had learned to move silently through the rooms of his life without disturbing the air. "I try to be efficient, sir. Good cleaning staff shouldn't be noticed." Something flickered across Alexander's face. Discomfort, perhaps even shame. "Well, I'm noticing now, and I'm asking you to play for me, regularly, instead of cleaning." Elena took a deep breath. The offer was tempting in ways he couldn't possibly understand. Before coming to this country, before the accident that changed everything, music had been her life. She had studied at the National Conservatory back home, had performed in concert halls to standing ovations. Then came the crash that took her husband and her career in one terrible night, leaving her with a shattered right hand, a traumatized daughter, and medical bills that forced them to leave everything behind. The doctors had said she would never play professionally again. After multiple surgeries and years of physical therapy, she had regained enough dexterity to play for herself, but not with the technical perfection her former career demanded. It had been enough to teach piano to neighborhood children for extra income, but not enough to support herself and Lucia. "Mr. Frost, I'm not the musician I once was," she said finally. "My hand..." She held up her right hand, showing the faint scars that ran across it. "I had an accident. I can play for enjoyment, but not at a professional level." Alexander's eyes fixed on her hand, then moved back to her face. "I don't care about professional level. I care about how it sounds, how it feels." He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "When you played just now, it was the first time in, I can't even remember how long, that I felt something. Actually felt something." Elena's resolve wavered. She knew about Mr. Frost's condition. The household staff talked, of course. They had watched his descent into depression over the past year, noticed how he barely ate, how he moved through the house like a ghost. Mrs. Chen had instructed them all to be especially quiet, especially unobtrusive. "Mr. Frost needs peace," she had said, but what Elena heard was that Mr. Frost was broken in some fundamental way. "I have a daughter," she said suddenly. "She's 16. I work 3 jobs to keep her in her school. I can't risk triple your current salary," Alexander said immediately. "For 2 hours of playing each day. Whenever you can fit it in around your daughter's schedule." Elena's breath caught. Triple her salary for less work? It seemed impossible. Too good to be true. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. Why me? Alexander turned away, looking out the window at the manicured gardens below. For a long moment he said nothing. When I was a kid, he finally began, his voice different somehow, less clipped, less commanding. My grandfather used to play the piano. He wasn't trained or anything. He played by ear. But he would make up these songs, funny little tunes about everyday things, about my grandmother burning dinner or the neighbor's dog digging up our garden. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He'd make me laugh until I couldn't breathe. He turned back to her, and Elena was startled by the naked longing on his face. I want to laugh again, Elena. I want to feel something besides this emptiness. The raw honesty in his voice touched something in her. Elena knew about emptiness. She had lived with her own version of it since the night of the crash. I'll need to talk to Mrs. Chen about adjusting my schedule, she said finally, and I would still want to keep some cleaning hours. I can't explain to my daughter why I'm suddenly being paid to play piano for my employer. Relief washed over Alexander's face. Of course, whatever you need. He straightened, some of his usual businesslike demeanor returning. We'll start tomorrow. After lunch. 1 o'clock in this room. Elena nodded, still not entirely sure what she had agreed to. Thank you, Alexander said, the words sounding rusty from disuse. After he left, Elena sat back down at the piano, her hands trembling slightly. What had she gotten herself into? You're doing what? Lucia looked up from her homework, eyes wide with disbelief. Playing piano for Mr. Frost? The billionaire guy? Elena set their simple dinner on the table of their small apartment. It's not a big deal, mija. He heard me playing when I was cleaning the music room and offered me some extra money to play regularly. But why? Is he like throwing a bunch of parties or something? Elena shook her head, sitting down across from her daughter. No, nothing like that. I think he's lonely. And sad. Music helps sad people sometimes. Lucia stabbed at her pasta thoughtfully. Is he nice? The other kids at school say billionaires are all jerks who step on people to get rich. I don't know if he's nice, Elena answered honestly. I barely know him even after working in his house for 2 years. He's distant, but today was different. Today he seemed human. Well, don't let him take advantage of you, Lucia said with all the righteous indignation of a teenager. You're a real artist, Mama, not some background music machine. Elena smiled, reaching out to squeeze her daughter's hand. I know who I am, Lucia, and I know what this job means for us. The extra money will help with your college applications next year. Lucia's expression softened. I could get scholarships. You don't have to keep killing yourself with all these jobs. We'll find a way together, Elena said firmly, like we always do. Now eat your dinner before it gets cold. Later that night, after Lucia had gone to bed, Elena pulled out the small electronic keyboard she kept in her bedroom closet. She put on headphones and began to play, her fingers moving through scales and exercises she had done religiously during her recovery. What would she play for Alexander Frost tomorrow? Nothing too technical. Her right hand still faltered on the most complex passages. Something with feeling, certainly. But how did you make a man laugh with music when you barely knew him, when all you knew was that he carried a sadness so heavy it had hollowed him out? Elena played softly into the night, searching for the right notes to reach a man who had everything except the ability to feel joy. The next day, at precisely 1 o'clock, Elena entered the music room to find it transformed. The windows were open, letting in fresh air and sunlight. The piano had been polished to a high shine. A comfortable chair had been placed at an angle to the piano, and on a small table beside it sat a pitcher of water and 2 glasses. Alexander Frost stood by the window, dressed more casually than Elena had ever seen him, dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt rather than his usual tailored suits. He turned when she entered, and she was struck again by how different he looked when animation touched his features. You came, he said, and Elena wasn't sure if she was imagining the relief in his voice. I said I would. She moved to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. You had it tuned, this morning. The technician said it's in perfect condition now. Alexander hesitated, then moved toward the chair. I don't want to rush you. Take whatever time you need to. Prepare, or whatever musicians do. Elena smiled despite her nervousness. We warm up, usually. She sat on the bench and began a simple scale exercise, feeling the familiar stretch in her fingers, the slight resistance in her right hand where the scars pulled tight. Alexander watched her intently, and she tried to ignore his gaze as she moved through her warm-up routine. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked up at him. "Any requests?" "Play what you feel like playing," he said. "I'm not looking for a specific piece, I'm looking for—" He trailed off, seeming unsure how to finish the thought. "A feeling," Elena supplied quietly. "You're looking for a feeling." Alexander nodded, settling back in his chair. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. Then she began to play, a piece she had composed during her recovery, when she was relearning how to use her damaged hand. It started simply, almost hesitantly, like someone testing uncertain waters. Then it built, gaining confidence, weaving in elements of folk music from her homeland, bright and lively passages that spoke of resilience and hope. When she finished, she kept her eyes on the keys, suddenly shy. The silence stretched between them until she finally looked up. Alexander sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But it wasn't anger or disappointment she saw in his expression. It was wonder. "What was that?" he asked, his voice rough. "Something I wrote. After my accident, when I was learning to play again, it felt like—" He searched for words. "Like watching someone find their way home after being lost." Elena's breath caught. That was exactly what the piece had always meant to her, though she had never put it into words. "Play something else," Alexander said, leaning forward slightly. "Please." 2 weeks passed, and playing for Alexander became the strangest part of Elena's day, but also, surprisingly, the part she looked forward to most. Their sessions followed. A pattern. She would arrive at 1, he would already be waiting, and she would play for 2 hours while he sat and listened, occasionally asking questions about a piece or requesting something specific. Today, Elena arrived to find the music room empty. She checked her watch. 1 o'clock exactly. In 2 weeks, Alexander had never been late. She sat at the piano bench, uncertain whether to wait or start playing. After a few minutes, she began a gentle warm-up, her fingers moving through familiar patterns. "I'm sorry I'm late." Elena looked up to see Alexander standing in the doorway. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, and there was a tightness around his eyes that she had come to recognize as stress. "It's fine," she said, stopping mid-scale. "Bad day?" Alexander moved to his usual chair but remained standing, too restless to sit. "Board meeting. The vultures are circling." Elena raised her eyebrows questioningly. "My company. There's a faction that thinks I'm—" He made a vague gesture. "Not fit to lead anymore. They're not wrong." It was the most he had ever shared about his work. Elena turned on the bench to face him fully. "Why would they think that?" Alexander paced to the window and back. "Because I've been distracted. Disengaged because I haven't been the ruthless bastard they've come to expect." His laugh was harsh. "Turns out depression doesn't make for inspiring leadership." Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. What would you normally do after a meeting like that? Fire someone. Make a cruel comment to Lynn. Order Way to drive too fast. He ran a hand through his hair. Act like a jerk because I feel like a failure. And today? He looked at her, something vulnerable crossing his face. Today, I wanted to hear you play. Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest that she quickly tried to ignore. This wasn't about her, it was about the music. Then sit, she said gently, and let me play something for stress. Alexander finally sank into his chair, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Elena turned back to the piano and began Debussy's Clair de Lune, letting the flowing notes fill the room with tranquility. She watched from the corner of her eye as Alexander closed his eyes, his breathing gradually slowing to match the peaceful rhythm of the piece. When she finished, the room remained silent except for the gentle rustle of the curtains and the breeze from the open window. How do you do that? Alexander finally asked, his voice quiet. Do what? Know exactly what I need to hear. Elena smiled slightly. I watch you. When I play, I can see what reaches you and what doesn't. Musicians have to be good observers. Alexander opened his eyes, studying her with new interest. What else have you observed about me? The question caught her off guard. That's not really part of our arrangement. I'm making it part of our arrangement, he said, leaning forward. I want to know what you see. Elena hesitated. She had indeed been watching him carefully over these past weeks, learning to read the subtle changes in his expression, the slight shifts in his posture that told her when a piece was touching something deep within him. I see someone who's forgotten how to connect, she said finally, not just with music but with everything. You live behind a wall. Alexander didn't flinch at her honesty. And what else? You're used to being alone, but you're not used to being lonely. That's new for you and you don't know how to fix it. The silence stretched between them. Elena worried she had gone too far, crossed some invisible boundary between employer and employee. She turned back to the piano, fingers hovering over the keys. I should keep playing. No, Alexander said, his voice gentle but firm. You're right, about all of it. He stood and moved to the window. Before my grandfather died, he told me something I've been thinking about lately. He said, success isn't measured by what you have, but by what has you. At the time, I thought it was just an old man's nonsense. And now? Elena prompted when he fell silent. Now I think he was warning me. About becoming. He gestured around the grand room at the mansion beyond. This. A man who has everything and feels nothing. Elena watched him, this powerful man suddenly looking lost in his own home. She had never imagined having a conversation like this with Alexander Frost. What had you before? She asked softly. Alexander turned back to her, surprise flickering across his face at the question. He thought for a long moment. Curiosity, he said finally. A desire to solve problems, to build something that mattered. Music, books that made me think, people who challenged me. His voice grew quieter. Somewhere along the way, I traded all of that for power and control. You could trade back, Elena suggested. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Is it that simple? No, she admitted. But it's possible. Alexander moved back to his chair, sitting down with less rigidity than usual. Play something else, something that reminds you of possibility. Elena nodded and began to play again, this time a piece she had composed while teaching Lucia to ride a bicycle, full of wobbles and near falls at first, then gaining confidence, and finally soaring with the joy of newfound freedom. As she played, she felt Alexander watching her, not just listening to the music but watching her face, her hands, the way her body moved with the melody. When she finished, he was still watching her with that same intensity. You were thinking about your daughter just now, weren't you? Elena blinked in surprise. Yes. How did you know? Your face changes when you think about her. It becomes softer, brighter. Alexander hesitated. Tell me about her. So Elena did. She told him about Lucia. Brilliant, headstrong Lucia who wanted to become a doctor, who stayed up too late reading medical journals, who still slept with the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was a baby. She found herself sharing stories she hadn't planned to tell, about their journey to this country, about the tiny apartment they shared, about how Lucia had helped her through the darkest days after the accident. She sounds remarkable, Alexander said when Elena finally fell silent. Like her mother. Elena felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. She's everything to me. Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then he glanced at his watch and looked surprised. It's almost 4. We've gone over our time. I don't mind, Elena said quickly, then felt embarrassed by her eagerness. I mean, I don't have to pick up Lucia until 6 today. Still, I've kept you talking instead of playing. Alexander stood straightening his jacket in a gesture that seemed to reset their relationship to its proper professional distance. Same time tomorrow? Elena nodded, gathering her sheet music. Same time. As she turned to leave, Alexander called after her. Elena? She looked back. Thank you, not just for the music today. The next day, Elena arrived to find not just Alexander waiting for her, but a large envelope on top of the piano. What's this? She asked as she set down her bag. Open it, Alexander said, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Elena picked up the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside were glossy brochures from 3 different music schools, all offering advanced programs for adult musicians. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him in confusion. Alexander moved closer, taking one of the brochures and opening it to a marked page. "This one has a program specifically for musicians recovering from injuries. They specialize in rehabilitation and retraining." And he took another brochure. "And this one offers full scholarships to musicians who want to teach in underserved communities." Elena stared at the materials in her hands, a mix of emotions washing over her. "Why are you showing me these?" "Because you should be playing for more than just me," Alexander said simply. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away in a billionaire's music room." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, embarrassed. "I told you, I can't play professionally anymore. My hand—" "Your hand is recovering," Alexander interrupted gently. "I've been watching you these past weeks. You favor it sometimes, yes. But you're stronger than you think. These schools—" Elena flipped through the pages looking at the tuition costs. "They're expensive." "I would cover everything," Alexander said. "Consider it an investment." Elena's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "I don't need charity, Mr. Frost." The formal address wasn't lost on Alexander. His expression cooled slightly. "It's not charity. It's recognition of talent." "It's not that simple," Elena said, placing the brochures back on the piano. "My life isn't that simple. I have responsibilities. A daughter to support. Arrangements could be made." "No," Elena's voice was firm now. "I appreciate what you're trying to do. But my music is private now. Personal. I'm not looking to perform again." Alexander studied her face, clearly trying to understand her resistance. "You're afraid," he said finally. Elena felt a flash of anger. "You don't know the first thing about my fears?" "Then tell me," he challenged, moving closer. "Help me understand why someone with your gift would hide it away." Elena took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions his well-intentioned gesture had unleashed. "The night of the accident," she began, her voice low, "I wasn't just injured. I was shattered. Not just my hand, but everything I believed about myself, my future. I had to rebuild from nothing." Alexander was silent, listening. "The music I play now—" Elena struggled to find the words. "It comes from that broken place. It's honest in a way my playing never was before. I'm not afraid of failing again. I'm afraid of losing that honesty, that connection to what really matters." She looked directly into his eyes. "The same thing you're searching for." Understanding dawned on Alexander's face. "I didn't mean to overstep." "You did, though," Elena said, but there was no anger in her voice now. "You're used to fixing problems with money. Some things can't be fixed that way." Alexander nodded slowly. "Point taken." He moved back to his chair. "Will you still play today?" Elena considered the question, then sat at the piano bench. "Yes, but today I want to play something different." Her fingers found the keys, and she began a simple, playful tune. One of the pieces her grandfather had taught her when she was a child. As she played, she added little flourishes, exaggerated certain notes, occasionally hitting a comically wrong note on purpose. It was the musical equivalent of a child telling a joke, complete with an obvious setup and punchline. And for the first time since she had begun playing for him, Alexander Frost laughed. Alexander's laugh hung in the air between them, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his entire face. Elena's fingers stilled on the keys as she watched him, a smile spreading across her own face in response. His eyes crinkled at the corners, and for a moment he looked like a completely different person. "That was terrible," he said, still chuckling. "Deliberately terrible. My grandfather used to play it for me when I was grumpy," Elena explained, delighted by his reaction. "He called it the Pouty Face Symphony. He said no one could stay mad while listening to something so silly." Alexander shook his head, the smile lingering on his lips. "It worked. I forgot about the board meeting completely." "Good," Elena said, turning back to the piano. "Now I'll play you something a little less ridiculous." The rest of their session flowed differently than before. The tension between them had eased, replaced by a new comfort that allowed Elena to play more freely, to take risks with her interpretations. When she finished her final piece, Alexander applauded, something he had never done before. Same time tomorrow? He asked, rising from his chair. Elena nodded, gathering her things. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at him. My daughter has a science fair at her school tomorrow night. She's presenting a project on cardiac medicine. Alexander tilted his head, clearly wondering why she was telling him this. She worked incredibly hard on it, Elena continued. I thought, maybe you'd like to come, see what your piano player's daughter is capable of. The invitation surprised them both. Elena hadn't planned to say it. The words had simply tumbled out. Alexander hesitated only briefly. I'd like that. He's coming where? Lucia's eyes widened in alarm as she rearranged the display board on their kitchen table. Mama, why would you invite your boss to my science fair? Elena carefully ironed Lucia's dress for the event. He's not exactly my boss, and I thought you might like to meet him. He seemed interested in your project. Lucia narrowed her eyes. Are you two like a thing? No. Elena set down the iron with more force than necessary. It's not like that at all. He's just, I don't know. He doesn't have many people in his life, and I thought it would be good for him to see something outside his mansion. Lucia didn't look convinced. Well, he better not make me nervous. I need to focus on impressing Dr. Rivera. She's on the scholarship committee. Elena smiled at her daughter's determination. You'll be amazing, with or without Mr. Frost there. Now try on this dress so I can see if the hem needs fixing. Later that evening, Elena stood near the entrance of the school gymnasium, scanning the crowd for Alexander. The science fair was in full swing, with students manning their display tables and parents and teachers wandering between them. Lucia was already deep in conversation with one of the judges. Gesturing animatedly at her project on artificial heart valves, she looks just like you. Elena turned to find Alexander standing beside her, looking strangely out of place in his designer suit among the casual attire of the other parents. She's much smarter than me, Elena replied with a proud smile. Come, I'll introduce you. As they made their way across the crowded gym, Elena noticed several people doing double takes at the sight of Alexander Frost. His face occasionally appeared in business magazines and local news, and he wasn't the type of person typically seen at a public high school event. Mama, Lucia called as they approached. Dr. Rivera loved my presentation. Then she noticed Alexander and straightened, suddenly self-conscious. Lucia, this is Mr. Frost. Mr. Frost, my daughter, Lucia. Alexander extended his hand formally. I've heard a lot about you, Lucia. Your mother is very proud of your work. Lucia shook his hand, her expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Thank you for coming, Mr. Frost. Would you like to see my project? That's why I'm here. For the next 15 minutes, Elena watched in amazement as her daughter confidently explained her research to one of the richest men in the city. Alexander listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that Lucia answered with growing enthusiasm. By the end of the presentation, the initial awkwardness had vanished, replaced by a genuine intellectual exchange. You've done impressive work, Alexander told Lucia, especially considering the limited resources available to you. Lucia nodded, her earlier wariness now completely gone. The 3D modeling software at school is really outdated. I had to find workarounds for some of the simulations. Alexander glanced at Elena, then back to Lucia. I might be able to help with that. My company has some connections in medical research. Before Lucia could respond, an announcement called for all participants to return to their stations for the final judging. That's me, she said, straightening her display cards. Wish me luck. You don't need luck, Elena said, giving her daughter a quick hug. You've done the work. As Lucia turned her attention to the approaching judges, Elena and Alexander moved away to give her space. She's remarkable, Alexander said quietly as they found a spot against the wall. You've done an amazing job raising her. She makes it easy, Elena replied, watching her daughter confidently address the judge's questions. Well, not easy, but worth every struggle. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, observing the bustling fair around them. Elena noticed that Alexander seemed more relaxed here, away from his mansion and the pressures of his company. There was something almost normal about him, standing in a high school gym with his hands in his pockets. Thank you for inviting me, he said suddenly. I can't remember the last time I attended something like this. You never mentioned family, Elena said carefully. Do you have children? Alexander shook his head. Never married. Never slowed down long enough to build a real life outside work. He gave a self-deprecating smile. And now I'm that cliché, the rich man who has everything and nothing at the same time. You have time to change that, Elena said gently. Before Alexander could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A teenage boy was being helped to a chair, his face pale and his breathing labored. A teacher called for anyone with medical training. That's Rodrigo, Elena said with concern. He has a heart condition. To her surprise, Alexander moved swiftly toward the scene. She followed, watching as he knelt beside the boy. I'm not a doctor, he told the panicked teacher, but I have some first aid training. Has someone called an ambulance? The teacher nodded, and Alexander turned his attention to Rodrigo, speaking calmly to him while checking his pulse. Elena stood back, seeing yet another side of this complex man she thought she was beginning to understand. The paramedics arrived quickly, taking over Rodrigo's care. As they prepared to transport him to the hospital, Alexander approached the boy's distraught mother. Which hospital are they taking him to? He asked quietly. City General, she replied, her voice shaking. It's where his cardiologist is. Alexander nodded and stepped away, pulling out his phone. Elena overheard fragments of his conversation. Something about ensuring the best care, about covering any expenses not met by insurance, about calling in a specialist. When he rejoined Elena, she looked at him with new eyes. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said simply. The awards ceremony was delayed due to the emergency, but eventually, the principal called for everyone's attention. Lucia's project won second place overall, earning her a modest scholarship and, more importantly, the attention of Dr. Rivera and the university committee. We should celebrate, Alexander said as they watched Lucia accept her certificate, beaming with pride. Dinner, my treat? Lucia bounded over to them, clutching her certificate. Mama, did you see? Second place. I'm so proud of you, Elena said, hugging her daughter tightly. Mr. Frost has suggested we celebrate with dinner. What do you think? Lucia looked at Alexander with newfound respect. Can we go to Pino's? They have the best pasta in the city. Pino's it is, Alexander agreed, smiling at her enthusiasm. As they walked out of the school together, Elena felt a strange shift in their relationship. This wasn't just her employer attending a school function. This was something closer to friendship. At the restaurant, over plates of pasta and warm bread, Alexander seemed to relax further. He listened as Lucia talked about her dreams of medical school, offering thoughtful advice about university applications. He shared funny stories about his own college days, making both Elena and Lucia laugh with tales of his early business failures. So you weren't always a success? Lucia asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork. Far from it, Alexander admitted. My first 3 startups failed completely. I lived on ramen noodles and slept on friends' couches. But you kept trying, Lucia said, clearly impressed by his persistence. I did, though sometimes I wonder if I focused on the wrong things along the way. He glanced at Elena, then back to Lucia. Success is complicated. As they finished their meal, Lucia excused herself to the restroom, leaving Elena and Alexander alone at the table. Thank you for tonight, Elena said. She really enjoyed talking with you. Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. You've built something precious, Elena. A real connection, a real life. He twisted his water glass slowly. It made me realize how long it's been since I had a simple evening like this. Just talking, sharing a meal. Elena studied his face, seeing the loneliness there despite the evening's warmth. It doesn't have to be rare, you know. There's a whole world outside your mansion. I'm beginning to see that, he said quietly. The moment was interrupted by Lucia's return. As they prepared to leave, Alexander insisted on paying the bill despite Elena's protests. Outside the restaurant, his driver was waiting with the car. Can we drop you both at home? Alexander offered. Elena hesitated, still conscious of the boundaries between them. We can take the bus. It's not far. Please, Alexander said. It's late and it's the least I can do after you included me in your celebration. In the end, Elena agreed. As the sleek black car pulled up in front of their modest apartment building, Lucia thanked Alexander for dinner and the ride, then tactfully went ahead to give the adults a moment alone. Same time tomorrow? Alexander asked, his usual question now carrying a different weight after the evening they had shared. Elena nodded. Same time. She started to get out of the car, then paused. You did a good thing tonight, helping that boy at the science fair. Alexander's expression softened. Music isn't the only thing that makes me feel something, it seems. Elena smiled. Good night, Alexander. It was the first time she had used his first name. From the look on his face, the significance wasn't lost on him. Good night, Elena. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Elena and Alexander's daily piano sessions. They talked more now about music, about their days, about Lucia's progress at school. Alexander laughed more easily, and Elena found herself looking forward to their conversations as much as the playing itself. One afternoon, Elena arrived to find the music room empty. This was unusual. Alexander was almost always waiting for her. She sat at the piano and began to play, assuming he was running late. After 20 minutes, Mrs. Chen appeared at the door. Mr. Frost sends his apologies. He's been called away on urgent business and won't be able to make your session today. Elena tried to hide her disappointment. Of course. Thank you for letting me know. He also asked me to give you this. Mrs. Chen handed her an envelope. Inside was a note written in Alexander's precise handwriting. Elena, business emergency. Makeup session this weekend? There's something I'd like to show you. At the bottom was his phone number, something he had never shared with her before. That evening, after much deliberation, Elena sent him a text. Hope everything is okay. Weekend works for me. His reply came almost immediately. Saturday, 10 a.m. I'll send Wei to pick you and Lucia up. Elena stared at her phone, surprised that Lucia was included in the invitation. When she told her daughter about it the next morning, Lucia's reaction was unexpected. You like him, don't you? She asked, watching her mother's face carefully. He's my employer, Lucia. That's not what I asked. Elena sighed, setting down the lunch she was packing for her daughter. It's complicated. He's not like anyone I've ever known. And yes, I enjoy his company. But there's a whole world between us. Lucia rolled her eyes in typical teenage fashion. That's so dramatic, Mama. He's just a person with a lot of money, not an alien. And I'm just a person who cleans his house and plays his piano, Elena replied gently. There are boundaries. Boundaries that you're both already crossing, Lucia pointed out. He came to my science fair. You call him by his first name now. And this weekend we're going, wherever it is we're going. Elena couldn't argue with her daughter's logic. The boundaries had indeed blurred over the past months. What had started as a strange employment arrangement had become something neither of them had anticipated. Just be careful, Lucia said, suddenly serious. I don't want you to get hurt. Elena smiled, touched by her daughter's concern. When did you get so wise? Someone had to while you were busy playing piano for Billionaires. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and mild temperatures unusual for that time of year. We arrived precisely at 10 a.m. in the sleek black car. Elena and Lucia were waiting outside their apartment building, both curious about what Alexander had planned. To their surprise, they drove not to the mansion, but to the city's small private airport. Alexander was waiting beside a helicopter, looking more casual than Elena had ever seen him in jeans and a simple navy sweater. A helicopter? Lucia exclaimed as they got out of the car. Are we flying in that? Alexander smiled at her enthusiasm. If that's okay with your mother. Elena looked uncertainly at the helicopter. I've never flown in one before. It's perfectly safe, Alexander assured her. And where we're going, it's the easiest way to get there. Which is where exactly? Elena asked. That's the surprise. Do you trust me? The question hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than a simple inquiry about a helicopter ride. Elena found herself nodding. Yes, I do. 30 minutes later, they were soaring over mountains, the city far behind them. Lucia pressed her face to the window, taking photos with her phone and exclaiming over the views. Elena sat beside Alexander, trying to hide how tightly she was gripping the edge of her seat. Not a fan of flying? He asked, noticing her white knuckles. Not particularly, she admitted. I prefer having my feet on the ground. Alexander leaned closer so she could hear him over the noise of the rotors. We're almost there. Look. He pointed ahead to a clearing in the densely forested mountainside. As they drew closer, Elena could make out a beautiful cabin nestled among the trees, with a small lake glittering beside it. What is this place? She asked as the helicopter began its descent. My grandfather's cabin, where he taught me to play the piano. The helicopter landed in the clearing, and as the rotors slowed, The peaceful silence of the mountains enveloped them. They stepped out onto soft grass, the air fresh and pine-scented. This is amazing. Lucia spun around, taking in the stunning scenery. You own all this? My grandfather left it to me, Alexander explained, leading them toward the cabin. I haven't been here in years. The cabin was rustic but beautiful, with large windows overlooking the lake and mountains beyond. Inside it was surprisingly cozy. Comfortable furniture, a stone fireplace, and in the corner of the main room, an old upright piano. It's not like your grand piano at the mansion, Alexander said, noticing Elena's gaze. But it has character. It's perfect, she replied, running her fingers lightly over the worn keys. Alexander showed them around the cabin, which was larger than it appeared from outside, with 3 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and a deck that wrapped around 2 sides. Lucia immediately asked to explore the trail down to the lake, and Alexander gave her directions, promising they would join her soon. Once Lucia had left, Alexander turned to Elena. I wanted to show you this place because it's the only spot where I've ever been truly happy. Before now. Elena felt the weight of his words. Why did you stop coming here? After my grandfather died, it was too painful. Then I got busy with the company and it seemed easier to just leave it behind. He moved to a shelf and picked up a framed photograph of an older man sitting at the piano, a young boy beside him. I was 10 when this was taken. Elena studied the photo, seeing the joy on both faces. You loved him very much. He was the only one who really saw me, Alexander said quietly. Not as an heir or an investment, but just as a kid who liked music and terrible jokes. He set the photo down and walked to the piano. I had the piano tuned last week. I've been practicing something. For you. Elena's eyes widened in surprise as Alexander sat at the bench and positioned his hands over the keys. Then, with only slight hesitation, he began to play. It wasn't a complex piece, a simple melody that a beginner might learn. But he played it with such earnestness that Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. When he finished, he looked up at her with a vulnerability she had never seen before. That was the first song my grandfather taught me. I'm out of practice. It was beautiful, Elena said honestly. Alexander stood from the piano bench. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about trading back the things that once had me, about possibilities. He took a deep breath. I'm stepping down as CEO of my company. Elena stared at him in shock. What? When did you decide this? I've been considering it for months. The board meeting that day, they were right about me not being fit to lead anymore, but not for the reasons they think. He moved to the window, looking out at the mountains. I built that company to solve problems, to create something meaningful. Somewhere along the way, it became about power and money instead. I lost my way. What will you do? Elena asked, joining him at the window. I'm establishing a foundation for arts education in underserved communities, music, visual arts, theater, programs that are always the first to be cut from school budgets. He turned to face her. I want you to run it. Elena took a step back, stunned by the offer. Me? But I don't have any experience running a foundation. You have something more valuable. Understanding of what music can do, how it can heal and transform. The rest you can learn. Alexander's eyes were bright with an enthusiasm she had never seen in him before. You told me once that some things can't be fixed with money. You were right. But money can open doors that would otherwise remain closed to kids like Lucia. Brilliant, talented kids who just need a chance. Elena's mind raced, trying to process what he was proposing. This is a lot to take in. I know, Alexander acknowledged, and I'm not asking for an answer today, just think about it. They heard Lucia calling from outside and went to join her by the lake. The 3 of them spent the rest of the day exploring the property, skipping stones on the water and eating the picnic lunch Alexander had arranged. Elena watched as Alexander and Lucia fell into easy conversation, her daughter asking pointed questions about his business decisions that made him laugh with their directness. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the lake, they sat on the deck with mugs of hot chocolate. Lucia had gone inside to call her friend about a school project, leaving Elena and Alexander alone. Thank you for bringing us here, Elena said, watching the changing colors of the sky. It's a magical place. It's been sitting empty too long, Alexander replied. It should be filled with music and laughter again. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had been a remote, hollow figure when she first began playing for him, now sitting beside her with color in his cheeks and light in his eyes. "You've changed," she said softly. "Because of you," he answered, his voice equally soft. "You made me remember what it means to be human." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Elena knew that whatever she decided about his offer, nothing would be the same after today. The boundaries she had been so careful to maintain had dissolved, revealing something neither of them had expected to find. "Will you play for me?" Alexander asked, breaking the silence. "Here, where my grandfather taught me?" Elena nodded, and they went inside to the old piano. As Lucia came downstairs to listen, Elena placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not a classical piece or one of her own compositions, but the silly, pouty-face symphony that had first made Alexander laugh. His laughter filled the cabin once more, joined by Lucia's. Elena's fingers danced over the keys, her heart lighter than it had been in years. In this moment, in this place, with these people, she had found something she hadn't been looking for. A new beginning. As the final playful notes faded away, Alexander's laughter softened to a smile that held all the warmth and hope that had been missing from his life for so long. "Play it again," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, and she did.